G'day friends, family, fellow patriots. Lord Stompy here in Adelaide, South Australia. Welcome to the show. Today, we are going to talk about democracy, or at least what passes for democracy in the current shithole that people have the nerve to still call Western civilization. I kid you not. Look around you, people. Why do you call this Western civilization? This is a human Kalergi zoo. What is wrong with you people? So, we're going to leave that issue alone for a moment, and I'm going to point out right here that the actual problem with democracy, first and foremost, is the average libtard who defends democracy the most is the person that is still in their deluded thinking calling this mess that we're in now Western civilization. There's not very much Western left about it anymore. You can see this with your own eyes when you walk down the street. So, firstly, you have the nerve to call this that surrounds us Western civilization when it has almost no links anymore to traditional Western European civilization. And then you have the nerve to say that the broad mass of people here in this Kalergi Zoo all should have the human rights and the voting rights that everybody else does. That everybody is equal. It doesn't matter whether you're a Zulu from South Africa or you're a deluded man who has cut your dick off and is wearing a dress, or even if you're a pedophile that has been convicted, sent to jail, then you get released. Then you get all the same democratic voting rights and the same rights of citizenship as anybody else in this hellhole. This is obviously a huge flaw. It's a major flaw in democracy. And still, you have the libtard majority who will all argue and fight and scream for their democratic rights. They'll make all sorts of arguments that the democracy we have now is somehow connected in a very realistic way to the democracy we had 120 years ago in places like Britain and America. And let's be honest, the democracy we had 120 years ago in Western nations that were democratic was essentially democracy for white European people of high standing, right? There was a lot more restrictions 120 years ago on who could vote. All right, and even back then, democracy still had some major flaws. Okay, it wasn't the magic silver bullet. Right, it wasn't the system that was so perfect and so unflawed that it was destined to rule Western mankind for the rest of eternity. Okay? I'm trying to say this in a way that people can understand. So, these are the problems with democracy. And obviously, I'm not the first person to discuss all the serious flaws with democracy. Many people have. Men such as Hitler and Mussolini pointed all these flaws out. That's why they basically embrace various forms of fascism to greater or lesser success. And without going too far down the fascist rabbit hole, the flaws with democracy, the obvious flaws, were a major reason why pre-World War II fascism rose as such a strong force. There was huge amounts of the civilian population in countries such as Germany, Italy, and certain Eastern European countries too, such as Romania, where the general population they weren't happy with democracy, and they actually voted with their feet. And this is where you get to this strange self-defeating part of democracy. When the majority of people in a country vote with their feet for a more authoritarian system, such as generally it's fascism, but hey, in Spain, they basically had sort of a clerical monarchist kind of authoritarianism after World War II. So, generally the people of Spain were reasonably happy with their lot. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole too far. What I need to say to you here comes this ideological flaw with democracy is democracy claims it's all about the rule of the majority, but when the majority of a nation all actually decide to vote with their feet for an authoritarian form of rule that then cancels democracy, then democracy becomes outraged. It becomes hysterical. It starts foaming at the mouth. And yet this is against the principles of democracy itself, to be outraged and offended and to try to undo the results of the democratic wishes of the masses and revert to a sort of milquetoast democratic voting system. So this is really weird, right? If tomorrow there was enough white people left in Australia that we formed a majority and said, look, this is it. White people need to consolidate for their own best wishes. All this mass immigration is just doing us too much harm. And all the white people in Australia voted with their feet that they were all going to move to a state such as Queensland, form a majority and form an authoritarian government ruled by white people that was essentially apartheid and authoritarian. And we set up a system whereby, immigrants and brown people were excluded from any kind of democratic voting and representation in that system. And say if we all lived in Queensland and we were 70% of the population, which is a majority, and most of us agreed with this authoritarian system, well, it would be our under democracy, it would be our democratic right to live under that system because that's what we chose for ourselves as people. Yet, modern democracy in its current form, all the people that believe in that would be going hysterical. They'd be foaming at the mouth and they would say, you don't have the right to do that. You guys are fascists. That's really bad. So this is this kind of weird democratic insanity. It ends up trying in this bizarre, what's the word? It tries to flex this weird milquetoast middle class power that essentially is this weak tyranny. That whenever and any time a nation or a group of people actually uses their democratic rights to rebel against democracy as a majority people, then basically democracy has a meltdown. It becomes incensed, it becomes hysterical, it becomes crazy, and it insists that you go back to the very, very flawed democratic system where just any freak, Fruit Loop, outsider, anyone, all has exactly the same rights. It's this bizarre equal playing field. Yeah. It's, and this is one of the hypocrisies of democracy. As soon as 10 years ago, as soon as I began looking into fascism seriously in a more deep way, I was like, my God, yeah, essentially, modern democracy is this, it's this bizarre soft tyranny of soft-headed middle-class bureaucrats, right? And as soon as you move away from that towards anything that's more truly representative of an ethnocentric blood and soil type system, these champions of modern democracy have a complete meltdown, and they demand you get back under their system. So this is the bizarre soft tyranny, and it doesn't just have a meltdown, right? What these bureaucratic democratic tyrants do is they use every type of basically blackmail and propaganda and brainwashing and everything they can do, like every dirty trick in the book. They will flex every dirty trick in the book to try and get authoritarian people back under their power. And essentially that is the problem. They want the tyranny of a soft middle class bureaucracy to rule. And it's really bizarre because they can never admit this, right? They'll use all these highfalutin ideals about the rights of man and international tolerance and freedom, and we fought for freedom and we fought for democracy. And the really weird thing is when they say things like we fought for freedom and we fought for democracy, this is true on the surface, but if people really have freedom and they want the freedom to live under an ethnocentric authoritarian government or a king or perhaps even some kind of religious clerical authority, if people as a democratic whole vote for that, right, then these middle class bureaucratic tyrants have a meltdown and they say you can't do that. That's against democracy, even though democracy is meant to be the rule of the majority, right? So there's this bizarre hypocritical catch-22 within democracy, right? And this idea that there's this egalitarian rule of the masses where they can rule themselves, that in itself is a very flawed argument. As I said before, all sorts of interlopers, freaks, genetically abnormal people, faggots, pedophiles, just complete weirdos that shouldn't really have a strong voice in the running of your civilization. This is if you want a robust, healthy civilization. All these sort of people should be excluded from power. And just for the sake of the civilization as a whole, literally. you know, one of the first proper arguments I heard against democracy was, well, you know, here's a man in a dress who's cut his dick off and he's considered completely equal to you. And he has an equal voice in power. And I'm like, well, no. My immediate instinct was like, no, he doesn't. He should be excluded from society as some mentally ill Fruit Loop. No one should be listening to his opinions. He should be completely isolated. He should be kept away from everybody, especially children. Right? He's not equal in any way. Right? I mean, all this is obvious. You know, if you're watching my channel, all of this, you know, if you're a regular viewer on my channel, all this is very, very obvious. And now, another thing about democracy and its weakness, its hypocrisy, and its flaws was, if we go back in history, right to the time when democracy was a rising force in our European history, right? Here's a very interesting thing that the modern democratic system has done, right? It has basically rearranged history to suit itself. Now, anyone who's a regular viewer on my channel will know this. So, basically rearranging history to make it represent your belief system is a form of mind control, and it is a form of propaganda. It's as simple as that. So if democracy was as fair and as free and as egalitarian as it claims to be on the surface, there would be no need for these democratic demagogues to be erasing history and adjusting history to suit their ideology, because democracy as a system in itself would stand on its own legs. It would have the strength to stand on its own merits, and it would have the strength it would have the ideological strength to be able to argue its position equally against the arguments of all the other political positions that are out there. Okay, but this is not the case. So if we look back into the when democracy was a rising force, when Europe was much more empirical, and it was the old European order. Okay, when we're coming out of the age of living under kings and queens and the nobility and the church. Okay, so if we look back that far, there was a lot of very, very highly regarded academics and thinkers who saw the rise of democracy as being a threat to the European people and the well-being of the European people and the long-term welfare of the European people. And these highly regarded academics were speaking out well over 100 years ago. And there was a number of them. There was Oswald Spengler, Gustave Le Bon. There was various others, a whole range of them, and these are academics and thinkers who were very highly regarded in their time, and even well into the early 20th century, they were still highly regarded. And essentially, once modern democracy got a global hegemony, well, over the Western empires anyway, it basically erased these people from the education system, from history itself. It had to memory hold these people because this is the cowardly nature of modern democracy. it has to delegitimize its opponents to the point where it erases them from history. And as I said, if it was a strong, robust system, it would stand on its own merits. So Gustave Le Bon was a very important thinker of the late 19th century. He's seen as the father of crowd psychology. He had a really good insight into the mind of humans once they form large groups. He's literally seen as the godfather of crowd psychology, and he wrote books about this. He wrote a really good book called The Crowd. And in this book, he predicted, he literally said that he did not believe in democracy because the average person isn't particularly intelligent. He said, when you get all these basic midwit people together in large groups, they end up with an over-exaggerated sense of their self-importance, and they come to bad decisions very easily, and they all have this overinflated sense of how smart and important they are, and then they all come to bad decisions as a group, and then they all pat each other on the back and they congratulate each other, what a great job they've done. And essentially, the bad decision leads to a lot of bad outcomes. And then the crowd of people will never admit that they were wrong and they made a mistake. And he said, if we end up with democracy as the ruling system, then essentially over time we will end up an idiocracy, because all these midwit people will keep making bad decision after bad decision as a group, and it will just undermine the traditional European order. Now, what Gustave Le Bon said well over 100 years ago has ended up being true. And this is why democracy had to erase him from history. And it's only now there's a resurgence in nationalism and anti-liberalism that he's being dusted off and looked at anew. And this is happening with a whole range of other academics, Oswald Spengler, various other very important pre-World War II academics, actually being seen as prophets now. And indeed, they were right. Their works have proved, over time, we have seen the idiocracy that is modern democracy, this monster emerge that these people have predicted. And now we're all paying the price. And still the liberal hordes, the midwit idiots, are all still screeching about their rights and their democracy and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, thanks for listening. It's been a pleasure talking to you about this, and God bless Deus Volt.